Hello everyone. My name is Mila Yuuki Undro, and my studio is called MuHa Games. Just to give you a brief background to myself, as I always like to point out that everything I say in my talk is from my point of view, my very specific point of view, and that's a 6-person indie studio. So the challenges we face are probably not the challenges that everyone will face, but I think hopefully it's still going to translate to many different studios. However, yes, we are a small indie studio. Our previous titles include the 2 Thea games. They're kind of 4X-ish strategy survival games. But the game that I'm going to focus on today is the remake of the classic strategy game of the 90s, Master of Magic. So hopefully, just out of curiosity, actually, how many of you have played Master of Magic back in the 90s? Yeah. So a few. It's always interesting for me because, like, I think back in the UK, it seems to be like a huge kind of thing for strategy players, but in Poland, not so much. So. But anyway, yeah, so it was a classic back in the day, and actually it's still an active game. You can still buy it on Steam, on GOG, and people have been playing it and modding it for almost 30 years now. So that's the challenge that we have, for some baffling reason, accepted to face, and that's the challenge that I'm going to talk about. So, right. So, yeah. So that general little quote there is my feeling about how it's all gone through. So the game is actually coming out on the 13th of December. So I can now talk about kind of the whole process. And yes, it's been pretty much that, from a kind of a great excitement of working on a great title. I actually played it myself as a kid, or more so my brother did, and I watched him from behind his shoulder. So I've had nostalgia towards it myself, and of course the hardcore fans more so than us. So yeah, so it was a yay moment. It was we were approached to do this awesome IP. And being an indie studio, obviously, there were a lot of advantages that we saw in working on a known IP. And I'll try to... In fact, I have rewritten this presentation last night because I thought I need to be constructive. I'm not going to complain for 30 minutes about the challenges of working on a known IP. I'm going to try and focus also on the positive side. So yeah, so so the whole theme of this talk is my kind of journey from a yay, I'm working on an IP, to a, oh my God, I'm going to kill the fans, to now, as we are about to release, back to a yay. Although I'm not sure if it's a yay we're about to finish and I won't have to look at it again, or a yay, it's a cool game. We'll see. Right, so yes, so to stay positive, I am going to start with the good. And some of it is obvious stuff, but then again, I think even the obvious stuff sometimes needs talking about. So yeah, it's when we received the game, you pretty much have a ready-made design doc, obviously. So you have the original game, you have all the wiki materials, and from a storyteller's point of view, so let's bring it back to that. You have a whole world. I mean, it was rich to begin with. It's a kind of, I think it's pretty much a kitchen sink fantasy world for me, but at the same time, it's got that kind of uniqueness to it. So it's got characters like Merlin, which, you can't really get more cliche than having Merlin as the wizard in a fantasy game. But they always have like their own little twist on the kind of heroes and wizards that they blatantly copied from everything that was around in the 90s. So from a storyteller's point of view, on one side, that was great because it's already created for you. But then you have the almost 3 decades of fans adding to that lore through mods, through the wiki materials, through their own kind of... I haven't actually seen any fan fiction as such, but you have the forums where they talk about the lore and the stories that they've kind of written themselves. So you don't just have the source materials for which you obviously do own the rights, the IP rights. You then have a huge chunk of material that, for me, is a bit more kind of grey area in terms of actual intellectual property and so on. So that was something that I unexpectedly had to watch out for, is, when I'm transferring or remaking the characters and the stories, am I using the material that I actually have the rights for, or am I looking at the stuff that people have remade? And hopefully we've managed to navigate it correctly, but that was something I wasn't necessarily expecting straight away when we accepted the project. So and again, it's that kind of I think there's a sense of security for me there was of building a story on a really solid foundation. So when I did my own IP with the Thea world, I had to start from scratch, think about every kind of detail of how the world works, how the story will work. Whereas here, I could build on top of a foundation that was already really, really well established. And yeah, my little note, of course, which is not to be ignored, but today's talk is supposed to focus more on, design and narrative design. But of course, the attraction of accepting someone else's IP to work on is sales, finances, or renown that you may or may not get from creating it. But of course, that's a double-edged sword that I will also talk about. But yeah, since I'm not talking from a business perspective today, I'll just mention that I'm not blind to that. That was part of the reason why it wasn't all like, oh yes, we love Master of Magic. It was also the fact that as a small indie studio, it's something that is a positive challenge, something that could put us on the map, as they say. So anyway, so those were the good signs, and yeah, let's go back to the resources. So I wouldn't underestimate, again, especially if you are not a hardcore fan of the IP that you are remaking, don't underestimate how much time you will need for research, because all these resources are, of course, wonderful, but you do need to spend the time to read them carefully. And when a game has been active for 30 years, there is a lot to read. I mean, the wiki is an amazing tool for us, but I would say it probably took me months of research to really feel like I'm ready to start kind of putting our own stamp on the world, on the characters, on the story, and the game design. And then, of course, the fans themselves. Now, that's something that obviously doesn't come at the very beginning, because when you start the project, you can't make it public. But for me, and I'll talk about this more in detail, once we were able to share screenshots and share the fact that we are making Master of Magic, the fans, just their knowledge and their engagement with you, I think, yeah, that's definitely been amazing, and something. I'd say it's something to lean on when you are trying to recreate someone else's work. So anyway, so that's just kind of the background of it all. So what is my real as a storyteller? Because I'll talk about design more in the next slide. But as a storyteller, for me, very quickly it became a battle of, I would call it, on one side you have the creative shackles, so to say, because you are supposed to recreate someone else's work that is already there, it's already beloved, it's already formed. On the other hand, for me, as personally, I don't know if it's for everyone, but for me, it was really hard not to add anything, and also I think wanting to attract a new audience and wanting to refresh a remake, you feel like you should be adding something, but at the same time you're constantly thinking, well, this character was already great 30 years ago, why am I changing it? And actually, this is one bit of advice that I will give throughout this talk is when you are making changes to a remake or to a known IP, I would say always ask yourself why. Why am I making this change? Is it simply because I think, what I thought about is better? And I would usually say if that's the case, then probably don't do it. And I'm not saying we haven't done it or I haven't done it. It's hard to avoid it, but I'd probably say don't because, I think respecting the core material is important and changes should be made when they will really improve the work and not only because, you feel you'll do it better. Right. Yeah, that's good to know that my mind works as I intended it to. Yes, so expand rather than change whenever it is possible. So Merlin, for me, is kind of the best example of I think, what we've done successfully in the remake, which is, as you can see, so you've got the old pixelated Merlin there, and you've got ours in the middle. So it's, he's remained the same. He's got a facelift, but he's not, he's not different in any significant way. So that's coming back to the building on a solid foundation rather than dismantling the foundation and rebuilding it in your own image. So just again with Merlin and the wizards in Master of Magic, they don't. It's not a game that has a lot of kind of lore that is, you don't have quests, personal quests as such, or big chunks of lore. So it's really just those little bits. So the design, the art design, the little blurb of his backstory. Those are the things as a storyteller that I had to do for Master of Magic. And again, yeah, with Merlin, it was at least easy to do. Although also difficult because, Merlin has been done not just in Master of Magic. Merlin has been done in countless and countless of ways over the years. But yeah, with Merlin, I decided there's absolutely no point in reinventing the wheel. I don't think we need another kind of quirky Merlin out there. I think he is what he is, and he's cool like that. So just to also show you, again, a bit of my approach to what I did with Master of Magic. So we've got the old, so that's the introduction that you get in the game's manual, or that's the story really behind Master of Magic. So rather than rewriting the whole thing, which could have been done, I just literally changed the things that I highlighted in red, just little tweaks to so that it works with our iteration, for reasons of mostly budgeting and things like that. For example, our wizards only show or are only shown on loading screens and in a kind of framed mirror. The 2D artwork shows in a framed mirror, whereas in the original you could you could see the actual 3D models of the wizards casting their spells or summoning creatures. So I felt that was a lore change in itself, because why can't we see our wizard in our wizard tower, what's going on? So that's where I felt I needed to clarify that. So in our version of Master of Magic, the wizard's kind of essence is in the mirror. They're kind of the tethered to whatever world they originally came from. And it's through this mirror that they enact their will on Arcanus and Mirror. And they also have the wizard's familiar, who are the physical presence, so who actually can manage your cities and go into battle for you and so on. So because we had to make that change, I then had to change the lore of the game. And that's really more or less as far as the changes that I wanted to make in the story. So that's as little as I'm trying to change in the remake. Right, so so for me, again, going back to the positive, so what have been my must-have resources in continuing the remake? So I'll actually take a step back first. So the artwork for the wizards, for example, because it takes time, obviously, to get a good artist and order 14 awesome artworks from them, that's something we had to do. As I said before, we had contact with the fan base and so on. And I won't lie, I'll show you in a second. There's been a lot of friction to some of the changes we've made to the wizards. I think that probably would have been avoided if I had already had this system going, which I think is kind of invaluable when you're kind of messing with someone else's IP. So for me, it's Discord first, because of course, before we were able to enter into a beta, we had dev diaries, basically, so monthly dev diaries where I would show screenshots of what we've done so far and talk about where we're going, talk about the changes that we've made, or talking about things that will stay the same. Then we have a Discord channel where we have we're lucky enough to have a very, very active community of our own, and then we added a mom community to it, which was really great. So now my system constantly is, show the screenshots, or, now we have a beta, so people play the beta, check out the changes, discuss them extensively on Discord, changes, tweaks if possible, repeat. So what I'll say here, and I'm not sure how it works for larger companies. I'm pretty sure it's probably more constricted there, but my policy is be as truthful as you possibly can with the fans, because they can be, I won't lie to you, hardcore fans of a beloved IP, of a known IP, can be absolutely brutal. The smallest change you make can blow up into a huge issue, a huge problem. So my approach is just staying as honest, admitting to mistakes, staying as honest as I can. I probably think I've sometimes said too much on why we've done this or that, but it hasn't blown up in my face yet. I've usually been able to actually turn the very negative situation into a positive one in terms of the community engagement, because I was quite open about, oh, right, actually, you're right, perhaps this change that we did was a mistake, or I'm sorry, we have to keep it because we don't have the resources to change it at this point. And people have responded well to that. Whereas if you try to kind of say, oh, we think, oh, yeah, that's one thing, just try never to say to people, oh, we think this is better. That, I'd say, if you take away one thing in remaking a known IP, do not say to people that you think what you've changed is better. I think that's a fatal mistake. Always try to kind of cover it up in a bit of, sugarcoat it. I know I just said I'm always brutally honest with people, but that's one point where I'm not. that's the only one where I'm like, perhaps less of the truth. Right, so the badish. That's where we're getting to the core of thing that I found is just the challenge of the expectations. And I know this is obvious, and I think everyone thinks, oh yeah, there's expectations when you do a remake or a sequel or anything like that. There's expectations, but for us, we knew it, but you don't realize it until you're actually in it and you're experiencing those expectations live, so to say. So huge pressure. For me, the pressure is added because I, as a fan of many IPs, not just games, I absolutely detest adaptations and remakes that change too much. Lord of the Rings, triggering subject. So yeah, for me that is the biggest challenge. So like you want to stay true to what people love, but as an indie, and this is where I will come back to my perspective, that could be different if we had AAA budgets and so on. Yeah, from our perspective, there was simply so many things that we can't do, you know, graphics and 3D art and all sorts of things that you would like to put in, but you can't when you're restricted with budget and human resources. So that's the constant battle. And what does modernizing mean anyway? That was something that I actually came across. I don't even know if I have an answer for you, because, you know, it will always come back to the same argument. It's like you'll say, oh, you know, we changed this bit of story or this bit of gameplay or something because it's for the modern audience, and then the hardcore fans will be, yes, but, you know, it worked really well back then and it could work again, and you won't know unless you tried it. And then you say, well, if we try it, we've spent, you know, weeks or whatever days implementing something that we'll have to throw out and so on. You know what I mean. So yeah, so modernizing, I think, that's a huge challenge, and you always have that at the back of your mind when you're redoing things. And the greater risk of burnout, that's something that I found interesting, and I've noticed it not just by myself, but the rest of the team. When we worked on our own IP, I felt we were more, I don't know, invigorated. I think working with the constraints of someone else's design, and this does not work only for, obviously, storytelling, but as I said, even programming and everything. It's so you can't put yourself into the work. You're constantly just trying to hit all the right tick boxes for all the features and all the mechanics that were in the original, and it really does get tedious. I can't stress that enough. It can get really, really tedious. Right. So yeah, just to highlight, I mean, I've already talked about this, so I won't dwell on it too much. But yeah, for me, the cult classic is one thing. Another thing that I find is really scary for me and really problematic is that Master of Magic, back in the day, was a mainstream game, and ours is an indie remake. And I'm finding that really clashes with people's expectations of it. I mean, if you imagine, I think I even said that to someone on Discord. We were having this conversation, and I said, I understand that as a player, you have no obligation to neither know or care that this is a small studio redoing your favorite childhood game. All the player cares about is they want to see the same. Right, so let's finally get to some case studies. Cherie and Sra are the two wizards that we made. I think probably the biggest changes initially in terms of kind of lore and artwork and stuff. And on one of them, we stuck to our guns, and on one of them, we actually decided that the feedback was reasonable and that we will change. So Cherie is one of the classic wizards from Master of Magic. As you can see, I'll talk about the elephant in the room. As you can see, Cherie used to be topless in the original. She is no longer topless. And also, I kind of streamlined her backstory, because to me it felt very all over the place. So I streamlined it and focused on the kind of voodoo priestess aspects of her, which I did feel was kind of the more modern approach, you know. But that caused a huge uproar. The topless thing obviously just caused a huge uproar. And we did in the end stick to our guns. And I'll say, I mean, there were a couple of reasons. First of all, I did feel that it was out of place in terms of the lore and the presentation and the story, the narrative of Master of Magic, I didn't feel that just this one female character suddenly being half naked made much sense. If you've played the Thea games, we have plenty of boobs there, and so we're definitely not shy to kind of, have boobs in our games. It's just that in Thea, that's common, and that's, is just normal. In Master of Magic, it felt like it was literally just hair. And then, of course, the very, very practical point of ratings. So if you apply for ratings, for consoles especially, one pair of naked boobs will probably mean your ratings going up. And, is it worth it? So some will say yes. Some will say boobs are always worth it. But for us, the answer was no. So that one. So I struggled with that one the most, I think. And again, so now I'll compare working on someone else's IP to my own. So this is actually, for me as a storyteller, the biggest struggle. So in Thea, whenever either finances or the gameplay or anyone else forces me to change the law, it's easy. I just have to sit down, work it into the law that I've already created, and bam, you have an answer. And no one can really argue with you, because I can say, well, I said so, so therefore it's canon. When you're working on a known IP, you can't do that. You need to really find ways to convince people that you're not just being kind of blasé about it. But anyway, we did feel that with Cherie, it just made sense to give her a slightly more focused story and modernize her look. And then we have Thra, which I think we went the opposite direction. So initially, I think the artist's interpretation especially was very, very different from the original. So Thra in the original game is a kind of a noble wizard, even though he comes from the race of dragons and, 5 minutes already. Right, anyway, so yes, Thra was this kind of angry dragon in our reiteration. I even gave him a law I explained it in his backstory, but people hated it. And you know what, we looked at it and we thought, actually, they are right. He's so different from the original. We are going to make the effort to remake him. And yeah, that made people happy. Always try to make changes if you can. I think if there's a lot of unhappiness, try it. Same with Hydra, again, was a similar story. So we listened to our fans, and it was a struggle, a lot of backwards and forwards. We couldn't replicate the mechanics of the original. Our model didn't have 9 heads, it had 3 heads, and so on. And so, yeah, it had to be changed, but we continued changing it. It had several iterations before both sides were happy, basically. And I know I have only 5 minutes, so I'm now going to rush through the rest of it. I've already talked about it, so that's fine. The curse of nostalgia and the disappointment of hardcore fans, that's the biggest challenge. That's the biggest step that you have to go through. And yeah, being honest with your fan base, using Discord, using Vita, using any means of social media and communication with the fan base, I think is the biggest advice from me to use. I won't talk now about the movement points, but yeah, so that's how I approach basically. Yeah, constant, honest communication, experiment. So yeah, some of the features and changes we've put into the game, but we weren't afraid to take them back when the feedback was really bad. But there's just going to be more of that with someone else's IP than your own, I feel personally, because you have less guns to stick to. And I'll just stick to the conclusion now, right? And what I wanted to say in the conclusion, now I don't have time to say too much about it, but for me, something that has woken up our team and had kind of given us a second breath, and something that we're finally feeling excited about, is thinking about expansions and DLCs, where you can actually add your own stuff and you can actually put more of yourself in. So as a piece of advice, I would say plan your DLC early. when you start working. Then I think perhaps you will avoid the burnout that we've gone through, because for us it's made a difference that we are now looking forward to something that we will add ourselves. Right, thanks very much.